The Honourable Shayne Mallard.
Mr. President. Give him the word.
I'm stopping at 6:30, so you might be partway unless you finish in 10 minutes.
Well, I might try to do it, Minister. Mr. Assistant President,
Deputy,
I rise to speak in support.
Order, Deputy.
Oh,
Deputy President.
the Deputy President.
Thank you.
Mr. Deputy President, I rise today to speak in support of the Greater Sydney Commission Bill 2015. In doing so, I'd like to note that whilst I'm speaking about a specific bill, this is part of a broader historical movement, the Greater Sydney Movement, which began well before our time here in this Parliament. Indeed, Sydney's history is chequered with the mixed success of previous governments' attempts to get this kind of reform right. But this is a government that is intent on delivering sustainable urban growth for the people of New South Wales. And what do I mean by sustainable urban growth? Growth that is coordinated with strategic planning. Coordinated with strategic planning in infrastructure, health, education, services across the Greater Sydney region. Major cities in Australia and around the world are all faced with the same problem: how to construct responses to population growth that satisfy the needs for efficiency, affordability, sustainability and, most important, livability. Only 10% of the global population lived in cities in 1900, only 10%. Today, 50% live in cities, and by 2050 this figure will be 70%. And this is not a new issue, Mr. Deputy President. When the McKell government set up the County of Cumberland Plan in 1948, the objectives were very similar: coordinated planning and governance to ensure a livable Sydney. And whilst we thank the County of Cumberland Plan for the preservation of huge expanses of green space, like the Western Sydney parklands, the so-called Green Belt, its downfall could be put down to its failure to strike a balance between the demands for growth and the need for continued urban sprawl and failure to plan for infrastructure for Sydney. Simply closing our eyes to the population growth that will occur in this city over the next 20 years will not make it go away, just like it didn't stop the population boom of the post-war period, the County of Cumberland era, or its legacy of raw suburbs left for decades without the infrastructure or the services needed to create healthy, thriving, livable communities, a legacy picked up by local government in many areas of the city. Sydney has been lazy with its planning, relying too heavily, as the Minister in the other place has put it, on its good looks, its physical beauty, rather than its intelligence and thoughtful design. We've all seen the mistakes and the end results of poor planning decisions, or as is more common, a lack of coherent planning, a lack of strategic planning. And we have seen the deeply entrenched distrust and the concern for urban development of any kind that is symptomatic of this loss of trust in most communities across Sydney. There are countless examples of where lack of strategic planning has resulted in poor decisions that have detracted from our quality of life through congestion, pollution, a loss of heritage and huge opportunity costs. The Greater Sydney Commission will work with councils and state agencies to drive the implementation of Sydney's regional plan, a plan for a growing Sydney, and to ensure that we finally address the long-running structural issue of metropolitan governance when it comes to planning our city, by looking at Sydney from and placing power in district or regional-based authorities. These reforms will move power from the Planning Department in Bridge Street to a more localised regional approach, and I think that's a fundamental part of this reform, taking power from the bureaucrats in Bridge Street and moving it to the regions. And as the Minister said in the other place, this is the Baird Liberal government's commitment to improving planning in Sydney and making Sydney more sustainable, more livable and more productive. Now, the bill sets out the architecture for the Greater Sydney Commission, providing for a 13-member commission with 4 Greater Sydney commissioners appointed by the Minister, 6 district commissioners to represent each of the 6 planning districts in a plan for a growing Sydney, and 3 ex officio members, being the Secretaries of the Department of Planning and Environment, the Department of Transport and the Treasury. The Commission will have 5 objectives. The first objective is to lead the metropolitan planning for the Greater Sydney. Working towards that objective, the joint regional planning panels, currently in place under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979, in the Sydney metropolitan area will be replaced by the Commission. It's important to note that the JRPPs have worked well in parts of Sydney and have fostered a more collegiate regional approach to planning. The Commission will seek to build on that approach. The other vital amendment contained within the bill is the insertion of a new Part 3B strategic planning, which for the first time introduces preparation, public exhibition and making of draft strategic plans in the planning legislation. Regional plans, such as a plan for a growing Sydney, will continue to be made by Cabinet, and the bill requires the Commission to assist the Minister with this process, including reviewing a plan for a growing Sydney by 2017, and then every 5 years thereafter. This is a first. This will bring expert advice directly to the Minister and to the Cabinet, allowing for their collaboration with the decision-makers, taking the short-term politics that has plagued the planning system out of the equation whilst maintaining a transport and informed approach. I just want to reinforce that. This will take the short-term politics that has plagued the planning system to date out of the equation whilst maintaining transparency and an informed approach. District plans will be prepared and made directly by the Commission. There is significant scope within the bill for public consultation of any district plans at a district level. The bill provides that the Commission is to ensure that draft district plans are prepared and placed on public exhibition within 12 months of the bill. This will build on the work that the Department has already done in developing sub-regional plans, with the Commission taking carriage of the draft unexhibited documents. The second objective is to promote orderly development, integrating social, economic and environmental considerations with regard to the principles of ecologically sustainable development contained in Section 6(2) of the Protection of the Environment Administration Act 1991. This is precisely why the new section of the Act, Section 6(3), provides for one of the three commissioners to have responsibility solely for the environment. And I think the Greens would acknowledge that. One commissioner is responsible solely for environmental matters. Similarly, one of the other commissioners will be principally responsible for social matters, and one other will have responsibility for economic matters. Ensuring that the commissioners have specific responsibilities will allow them to assist the government in decision-making that takes into account with equal weighting all the elements of the development that are at play when it comes to the growth of Sydney. The third objective addresses the need to integrate the government infrastructure decision-making with land use planning, what someone calls the holy grail of planning in this state. Infrastructure and land use decisions will be coordinated for the first time through the work of the Infrastructure Delivery Committee. The Greater Sydney Commission will develop infrastructure delivery plans to identify infrastructure priorities that will drive improved development. Crucially, the presence of the Secretaries of Planning, Environment and Transport will ensure the horizontal integration of government agencies into the Commission to ensure the decisions are made with the necessary information and due consideration of each agency's needs and views. This should be seen as the end of the dreaded silo approach to government departments where planning decisions are concerned, a fundamental reform. The fourth objective of the Commission relates to the historic undersupply of homes in New South Wales. This is a highly contested topic. It is indeed an issue which has deep ramifications for our city's future. To address this issue, the government has a target of approving 50,000 new homes each year across the state. To support this, the Commission will lead strategic planning in Sydney for new homes and new communities across a diversity of forms. And it's important to note, across a diversity of forms. Housing choice and quality is just as important as housing supply. The fifth objective of the Commission is to encourage development that is resilient, taking into account natural hazards. As we move into another summer of extreme El Nino weather, the economic, social and environmental imperative for resilience planning becomes increasingly clearer. Floodplain management, largely the area of councils, building on flood-prone areas is something that the Commission can and this legislation will take a lead role in. As a Member of Parliament and as a former councillor myself, I'm proud to say that the state and local government have played and will continue to play a critical role in ensuring Sydney is ready to address the risks posed by the ongoing changes to our climate. Now, Mr Deputy President, essentially this bill is about one thing, ensuring that in planning our city we are not just talking about one small part of Sydney, dealing with one privileged fiefdom at the expense of another. Rather, this is about encouraging a holistic approach to planning Sydney, both geographically and in terms of administration. We need to make sure environmental, social and economic concerns are at the heart of every planning decision that is taken, just as we need to see how the decision with regard to one street may affect the very next street. The Greater Sydney Commission will for the first time provide strategic planning for Sydney that is based on a regional approach, decentralised from the locus of power in Bridge Street. It will professionalise planning, strategic planning, stopping its politicisation for short-term gain. As the Minister said in the other place, and I would like to conclude with a quote that he used from the former Lord Mayor of Sydney, Lucy Turnbull AO, who in her 1999 book, Sydney, A Biography of City, wrote, and I quote, Perhaps at a time when the Sydney region has been enjoying such a surge in economic activity, it is time to revive the idea, promoted earlier in the 20th century, of a Greater Sydney movement. The planning and future of Sydney, at both a tangible and intangible level, should not be left to someone apparent ill-coordinated cluster of state government departments and an almost dizzying plethora of 41 councils, to name just a few. There should be a way of looking at this greater city in its entirety rather than a maze of fiefdoms with its own agenda and its own set of priorities. Mr Deputy President, I commend this bill to the House.